Matthew 12, 1-8. Lord of the Sabbath. Matthew records that time Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck heads of grain and eat. The Pharisees observed this and said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath." Their accusation was rooted in their understanding of the law. The Sabbath command, given in the covenant made with Israel at Sinai, functioned as a sign between God and that covenant people. It was a marker of identity within the Mosaic order, regulating time, labor, and worship under the covenantal structure that governed Israel's national life. Yet in this moment, the disciples' simple act of eating grain becomes the occasion for a deeper revelation about the nature of that covenant and the authority of the one standing before them. Jesus responds first by recalling an episode from the life of David. When David fled from Saul, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which was lawful only for the priests. The narrative found in the days of Ahimelech demonstrates that even within Israel's scriptures, there were moments when human necessity intersected with ceremonial law in a way that exposed the deeper intent of God. The point was not merely about hunger. David represented the anointed king who, though rejected and pursued, nevertheless had divine authority. In that situation, the ceremonial restrictions surrounding the sacred bread yielded before the presence and purpose of God's chosen king. Jesus then gives another example. The priests in the temple. Every Sabbath they performed work, slaughtering sacrifices, preparing offerings, carrying out the duties of the sanctuary. Yet they were considered blameless. Their labor did not violate the Sabbath because it served the temple and its sacred function. With these examples, Jesus leads his hearers toward a profound claim. Yet I say to you that in this place there is one greater than the temple. The temple stood at the center of Israel's covenant life. It was the meeting place between God and his people, the location where sacrifices were offered and where the priesthood mediated access to God. To say that something or someone was greater than the temple was to speak about the very heart of Israel's religious system. In the presence of Jesus, the reality toward which the temple pointed had arrived. The temple was never an end in itself. It was a shadow of a greater dwelling of God among men. The authority embodied in Jesus surpassed the authority of the temple structure and its rituals. Jesus then quotes the words spoken through the prophet Hosea. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. That statement, recorded in the prophecy preserved in the book of Hosea, had long stood as a divine critique of a system in which ritual observance overshadowed the heart of God's purpose. Sacrifices, offerings, and ceremonies belonged to the covenantal framework given to Israel, yet they were never the ultimate expression of God's desire. Mercy, reflecting the character of God himself, revealed the deeper reality that those outward forms were meant to point toward. Jesus tells the Pharisees that if they had understood those words, they would not have condemned the guiltless. Their interpretation of the Sabbath had elevated the regulation above the very intention of the law. The passage culminates with a decisive declaration. For the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. The title Son of Man echoes the vision recorded in the prophecy of Daniel, where one like a Son of Man receives dominion and authority from the Ancient of Days. By using this title in connection with the Sabbath, Jesus places himself above the covenantal institution that governed Israel's sacred time. The Sabbath, like the temple and the sacrificial system, belonged to the order established through Moses. It was part of a covenant structure that functioned as a tutor and guardian within Israel's history. But the authority of the Son of Man transcends that structure. Thus, the controversy in the grain fields reveals more than a disagreement about Sabbath regulations. It reveals the arrival of the one in whom the realities symbolized by the law find their fulfillment. The temple, the priesthood, the sacrifices, and the Sabbath all pointed forward to a greater reality. In the presence of Jesus, that reality stood before them. The one greater than the temple through the fields, and the Lord of the Sabbath declared his authority over the covenantal signs that had governed Israel's life for generations.